I am recording now. Yes, you are being recorded. So yeah, if you guys can mute and, or, feel free to unmute yourself if you have questions, or you can write things in the chat box as well. I'm going to go through the presentation and then we can have some discussion afterwards. And Lisa, if you want to interject anything, feel free if I get anything wrong. So let me start this up. Slideshow. Share computer sound. Slideshow. Okay. So thanks everybody for coming on. I just wanted to take some time to talk about what I have learned through my course as a Laudato Si animator. Elise and I were in this course. It was offered by the Global Catholic Climate Movement. And so I'm going to just talk a little bit in the beginning about kind of the science of climate change. And then I'm going to, from there, go into some of the details of the Laudato Si and what Pope Francis calls for us to do related to caring for our common home. And let me start with this little introduction to what the Global Catholic Climate Movement is about and what they're trying to do. Take a minute for it to load. Hopefully.
Oh, do it.
Come on. Okay, there we go.
Okay. Okay, go back.
Great. So that's a little introduction to Global Catholic Climate Movement. I think Elisa would agree, it was really a great experience. And I was just really struck by just how much the Catholic Church is doing. Oops, hold on, I'm gonna play that again. To engage the Catholic community in climate change and caring for our common home. And also not just the Catholic community, but all religions across the world, but particularly through this Global Catholic Climate Movement, they are doing a tremendous amount of work, not only teaching people to be animators, and the idea of being an animator is that we share the story of Laudato Si with our parish and with our community, but also just educating on a broad spectrum of ways through YouTubes and videos and in person back when we could do in-person events. So really impressive organization. So hold on, I'm trying to go back. Okay, so a little bit of background on climate change and the greenhouse effect. I don't know how many of you are familiar with Laudato Si, but this is a copy of the book. I guess you can't see me, but I have so Laudato Si is a book that Pope Francis wrote. But just to give you a little bit of background on the greenhouse effect. So the basic explanation for why CO2 and other greenhouse gases warm the planet is very simple and has been known to science for more than a century. So some important facts, and this might be redundant, or maybe you all know this, but the atmosphere is transparent to visible light. So the rainbows of colors from red to violet that make up natural sunlight. When the sun shines, like it shows in this picture, the light passes right through the atmosphere and it warms the earth. The warm Earth then radiates some of its energy back upward into the form of infrared radiation, as the color of light that lies just beyond the red that our eyes can't see, unless we're wearing like infrared night vision goggles. So if all of that infrared radiation that's being reflected back was escaped back into space, the Earth would be frozen solid. However, naturally occurring greenhouse gas molecules, including not just CO2, but also methane and water vapor, intercept some of it, re-emitting the infrared radiation in all directions, including back to the Earth. And that's what keeps us warm. I like to think of the atmosphere as a blanket that surrounds the Earth. But when we burn fossil fuels, like coal and natural gas for energy, we add carbon dioxide to this blanket. So that's like thickening the blanket. And the thicker the blanket gets, the more heat it traps underneath. The blanket effect then leads to warming, which then disrupts the climate. So when we add extra greenhouse gases to the atmosphere, we increase the atmosphere's heat trapping capacity. Less heat escapes to space, more returns to Earth, and the planet warms. Plants grow, as we know, using the regular carbon dioxide process that animals excel. So some CO2 is part of the normal life process. But as I said, we're adding carbon dioxide or CO2 to the air when we burn coal, oil, and natural gas for energy. So we refer to this as rampant CO2 because there is so much of it and it's getting out of control. Rampant carbon dioxide builds up in the atmosphere and ocean where it causes problems for the Earth's climate and ecosystems. So now that we know a little bit of understanding about climate change and the greenhouse effect, we need to think about how we can reduce our use of fossil fuels. Reducing our emissions of heat-trapping gases is the solution. So some of these slides that I'm going to be showing are slides that I've taken from different presentations that I was fortunate to have been a part of during the class. And these first slides are courtesy of Peter Umami, who's a PhD from the Yale School of Environment. The IPCC definition of what is climate change is attributed directly or indirectly to human activity that alters the composition of the global atmosphere, and which is in addition to natural climate variability observed over comparable time periods. The UNFCCC makes a distinction between climate change attributable to human activities altering the atmospheric composition and climate variability attributed to natural causes. So just a little, I know this is a busy slide, but a little overview of causes and consequences of climate change. So there's, like I talked about, there's really two main sources of input into the climate change process. We have land use changes, which involve deforestation, desertification of the soils, and then we have fossil fuel burning through cars, agriculture, industry. So those two human activities feed into the CO2 issue of the create that rampant CO2 that I was talking about, and that leads to the greenhouse effect. And the greenhouse effect has various impacts on our environment. It relates to the ice caps melting, changes in precipitation, ocean acidification, and abrupt climate changes. Also, we can see effects. The blue, yeah. Circles? That's the blue circles. And the red circles are disasters that we're seeing more and more of. Hurricanes, storms, typhoons, drought. So those are sort of the two main factors that we can see from impacts and consequences from climate change. So a couple of key points I just want you to keep in mind. Human activities are the major causes of climate change. Human influence on the climate system is clear. There is evidence from increasing greenhouse gas concentrations in the atmosphere, positive radioactive forcing, observed warming, and understanding of the climate system. So this slide just shows you the acceleration of greenhouse emissions over time. So just some facts, and I know it's hard to take all this in, but CO2 concentrations have increased by 40% since pre-industrial times. And that primarily comes from fuel combustion through vehicles and cars and industrial processes. And secondarily, we see a lot of emissions from net land use changes. But you can see in this graph that the largest input is from our fossil fuels. The second point, key point, is the atmospheric concentrations of carbon dioxide, methane, and nitrous oxides have increased to levels that are unprecedented. And this has led to the greenhouse effect, disturbances in the carbon cycle. And for example, the ocean has absorbed about 30% of the emitted anthropogenic carbon dioxide, which is causing ocean acidification, which is having devastating impacts on our coral reefs and on the organisms that depend on a healthy ocean to survive. Sorry. The key point, third key point is biophysical evidence of climate change is real. We have seen warming of the climate system since 1950s. The atmosphere and the ocean has warmed. The amount of snow and ice has diminished. Sea level has risen, and the concentration of greenhouse gases has increased. Hold on, I gotta let somebody in. So this is just a little graph to show, a big graph to show you how temperatures are rising all around the world. So we can see as the red is warmer, and we can see that almost the whole planet is now in red. So we can see temperatures increasing all around the world. Here's a couple slides of some multiple indicators of global climate change. The first one in the green is our Northern Hemisphere spring snow cover. So we're seeing less snow cover, which leads to less water and causes the droughts. Below the green, a really dramatic decrease is the critical Arctic summer sea ice extent. So we're seeing that our ice caps are melting, and that is causing sea level rise. And we're seeing global change in global average ocean heat content. So that's back to what I was talking about, ocean acidification. In addition to the acidification, we're seeing sea temperatures rising in the oceans, which affects eliminates the cold upwellings, that nutrient-rich cold water to the surface for birds and other animals, marine mammals that depend on them. And then the last slide is showing the sea level change over time. And then we can observe changes in annual precipitation over the land. So we're seeing less rainfall, more drought in many places. So the fourth key point, and this is like the last bit of the science that I'll get into, is that the impacts of climate change affect all sectors of human life, but it's particularly evident and being extremely relevant and felt in developing countries, such as Africa, Asian, and Pacific, and they're the most vulnerable to climate change impacts through things such as economic decline, disease spread, famines, finances, biodiversity loss of culture, and disasters. So there's a couple points to make of how we're already seeing climate change is already affecting people in Africa. We're seeing impacts on the weather patterns, flooding and drought, impacts on water supply and quality. That's evident mostly in West Africa around Mount Kilimanjaro. We're seeing impacts on agriculture and food, human health, malaria, Ebola, impacts on shelter, particularly detrimental impacts to the vulnerable populations in those countries such as women, children, and the elderly, impacts on national security, increased conflicts, and obviously impacts on ecosystems being more vulnerable. So these developing countries are feeling the effects of climate change. They're living climate change impacts right now. And also it's being felt in Asia. This is some of the ways climate change was felt in Asia in 2019. India and Pakistan had a heat wave of up to 50 degrees Celsius. There were torrential rains in Bangladesh, Nepal, India, and Pakistan. The Mekong is almost on the brink of collapse due to hydropower construction and intense dry weather. The rising seas that I was talking about, sea level rising, is engulfing Indonesia's coastline. That's causing mass migration and loss of homes. And in Indonesia's forests, as we all probably heard about in the news, were ablaze. And the El Nino pattern is causing dry seasons to be harsher than usual, having more fires, and then we're having more land clearing by farmers. And then in particular in the Philippines, they've been just devastated by typhoons. In 2019, there were over 20 typhoons that hit the Philippines. So the last key point here is that we must now and ever be inspired by the power and poignance of Pope Francis's Laudato Si. It's a dynamic, clear-sighted, and inclusive call to action that has infused the global climate and environment movements with new energy and momentum. It is engaging new audiences on change and environmental degradation seriously as a spiritual concern. So now I'm going to move into more examining what Francis has called us to do in the Laudato Si. And some of these slides come from Father Jostran Karithadan. I'm not sure how to say his last name. He's an Indian father. He is the coordinator of the sector of ecology and creation at the Vatican's diocese of promoting integral human development. And he just gave an outstanding presentation, I thought. So I lifted a lot of his slides. Laudato Si, as I was mentioning, has been called the most important environmental text of the 21st century. And now I'm going to play this video, which is a great piece that I found on the YouTube by a Franciscan priest that really just gives a great overview of Laudato Si. It runs for a little while, but I think it's worthwhile.
5 years ago, Pope Francis promulgated Laudato Si.
Come on. It'll play. Why are you being so difficult today?
Same question. Why care about the environment? Yeah, why waste time?
Nope, don't hear it.
We are all interconnected.
You don't hear it?
Profit
Nope.
doesn't just hurt the trees.
You guys aren't not hearing it?
Are you hearing it?
Why is that
No,
happening?
no.
Okay. No?
No, I can't hear it either.
Nobody's hearing. Okay, sorry, hold on. Let me try. Hold on, sorry. Let's try this.
Jen, ask everyone to turn off their video when you're showing your video so that it'll come out.
Oh yeah, maybe that'll help.
Yes, please.
What?
Everyone turn off your video.
Yeah, it's
We all
probably
need to
eating
put-
up a lot of the.
Take off the video?
Yeah, turn off your video.
That might help.
Everyone,
But I don't
turn
think it's
off the
gonna help
video.
the sound.
Where is my video?
Yeah, it's just coming out
Stop
garbled
video.
here.
Let me see.
5 years ago,
Any
Pope
better?
Francis promulgated
Yes, now I hear
Laudato
it.
Si
Is it better? Okay.
on care for our common home, the first ever encyclical devoted to the environment, leaving many Christians with the same question.
Sorry, let me go back to slideshow. Okay. Oh, sorry guys. Well, we'll just watch it this way.
5 years ago, Pope Francis promulgated Laudato Si on care for our common home, the first ever encyclical devoted to the environment, leaving many Christians with the same question. Why care about the environment? More importantly, why waste time on a document about the environment when human beings face far more important issues? For Francis, the answer is simple. We are all interconnected. Exploiting God's creation for short-term profit doesn't just hurt the trees or rivers. 5 years ago, Pope Francis promulgated
sorry,
Laudato Si.
Oh my goodness. I'm sorry. I'm just gonna leave it. I'm just gonna leave it here.
What?
I don't know why I'm having so much internet problems today. I was trying to go back to slideshow, but
On care for our common home. 5 years ago, the first ever encyclical devoted to the environment, leaving many Christians with the same question. The first ever encyclical devoted to the environment, leaving many Christians with the same question. Why care about the environment? Why waste time on a document? More importantly, why
I'm sorry. I don't know what it's doing. It keeps playing it twice.
It's playing it twice and
5 years ago, Pope Francis promulgated Laudato Si on care for our common home, the first ever encyclical devoted to the environment, leaving many Christians with the same question. Why care about the environment? More importantly, why waste time on a document about the environment when human beings face far more important issues? For Francis, the answer is simple. We are all interconnected. Exploiting God's creation for short-term profit doesn't just hurt the trees or rivers, it hurts human life, particularly the poor and vulnerable. For this reason, Laudato Si is a landmark work of church teaching that brings together science, theology, and social action to deal with much more than just the environment. It seeks to create an integral ecology in which all that is sacred is considered and cherished. What does the document say, and why is it important for every person on earth? This is Catholicism in Focus. For those whose medieval Umbrian is a bit rusty, the title Laudato Si comes from the famous Canticle of the Creatures by St. Francis of Assisi, Laudato Si mi Signore, praise be to you, my Lord. You really have to read the primary texts in their original languages, is something my professors used to say. This literary allusion gives insight to Pope Francis's mindset. We must be like the saint who saw all of God's creatures, not in regards to their utility, but as ends in themselves, giving praise to God by their very existence. Personifying the earth as sister, just as St. Francis did, Pope Francis writes in his introduction, "This sister now cries out to us because of the harm we have inflicted on her by our irresponsible use and abuse of the goods with which God has endowed her. We have come to see ourselves as her lords and master, entitled to plunder her at will. As a result, we as a human species have committed many sins against nature, against God, and against one another, greedily consuming more than we need, wasting precious resources meant for the good of all." In the opening chapter of the encyclical, he addresses many of them by name: atmospheric pollutants, dangerous residues, increased global temperatures, sea level rise, extreme weather events, contaminated water, scarcity of water, the acidification of soil and water, deforestation, extinctions of thousands of species, overfishing, erosion of coral reefs, and the overall loss of biodiversity, to name just a few. But of course, as Francis writes, human beings too are creatures of this world, and so widespread environmental degradation doesn't just hurt natural resources. It hurts human life as well. Cities have grown unruly in many areas. They're inefficiently run, filled with pollution, and leave its citizens crowded in a world of cement and asphalt. Those who have relied for generations on the fruits of the environment, people like fishers and farmers, are finding it more difficult to support themselves. In areas where precious metals or oil is found, locals are often exploited by multinational corporations, even expelled from their own lands. The poor are forced to live where pollution is high and environmental disasters are frequent. This is a far cry from what Pope Francis calls the gospel of creation. In chapter 2 of his letter, he looks to the biblical accounts of creation, the Judeo-Christian approach to the mystery of the universe, the life of Jesus, and the social tradition of the Catholic Church to teach an invaluable truth. We are meant to be among and for creation as its caretaker, not above it as its Lord. Humanity was never given unlimited authority to do whatever it pleased with the earth. Amassing excess private property at the expense of others is not the will of God. The earth is a gift meant for all, to be cared for by all. Meaning that the resources of the earth must be shared equitably, but also that the resources of the earth should be properly respected in their own right. There is a dignity to creation beyond what it can do for us. The ultimate destiny of the universe is in the fullness of God. The ultimate purpose of other creatures is not to be found in us. Rather, all creatures are moving forward with us and through us, towards a common point of arrival, which is God, in that transcendent fullness where the risen Christ embraces and illumines all things. Human beings, endowed with intelligence and love, and drawn by the fullness of Christ, are called to lead all creatures back to their Creator. Again, you can see why he invokes St. Francis's Canticle of the Creatures. We are meant to see all of creation as our brothers and sisters, as beings in relationship with God. Unfortunately, this is not even remotely close to true in our world. Why is that? In chapter 3, Francis gets behind the individual problems to identify the philosophical flaws that inform them. He identifies two root issues. The first is that we have adopted a technocratic approach to the world, a sense that science and technology are supreme forms of truth capable of solving any issue, and so licensed to reduce the world to exploitable resources. While Francis does not deny the incredible advancements to human life brought about by science and technology, what he calls two products of a God-given human creativity, he cautions against elevating them beyond their capabilities or letting them dominate the world. The exploitation of DNA, weapons of mass destruction, and massive invasions of privacy by information technology all show, as he says, that our immense technological development has not been accompanied by a development in human responsibility, values, and conscience. Instead, it is accompanied by an anthropocentrism that finds no inherent value in creation. The world is simply meant to be exploited for human purposes. Which is a bit ironic, sadly enough, because it doesn't even do that particularly well. Along with the technocratic mindset, Francis points out that there is a second, seemingly contradictory root problem at work. This situation has led to a constant schizophrenia, wherein a technocracy sees no intrinsic value in lesser beings, coexists with the other extreme, which sees no special value in human beings. In a subtle way, this is seen in the increased reliance on an automated workforce. Using machines for manufacturing cuts costs and makes things easier for humanity, but it also strips people of the opportunity to work, a necessary endeavor, not only because it provides income, but because work brings fulfillment to one's life. Without meaningful work, human capital erodes, undermining the very purpose for technology in the first place. Of course, the schizophrenia of a technocracy is seen in far more violent examples as well, as in the case of abortion. For Francis, this is further evidence that we live in a throwaway society that has no regard for anything sacred. Not for beautiful ecological wonders, not for limited natural resources, not even for human life. For Francis, pollution and overconsumption are not the problems in themselves. They are symptoms of a far more serious disconnect in the values of society. Thus, for Francis, the answer is not simply to plant more trees or to recycle, although he certainly wouldn't object to these things. The world does not need further cosmetic changes that at best treat symptoms. It needs a fundamental shift in the way it approaches the world around it. In other words, it needs an integral ecology. In Chapter 4, Francis gets to the heart of the document in which he challenges all people of the earth to embrace the interconnectedness of all in creation. It is not enough to focus on a singular issue while ignoring another. Issues of the environment are integrally related to those of the economy, society, and culture. He writes earlier in the document, although it seems to capture the essence of this defining chapter, we have only one heart, and the same wretchedness which leads us to mistreat an animal will not be long in showing itself in our relationships with other people. Every act of cruelty toward any creature is contrary to human dignity. And that's it. That's the game right there. While he goes on in chapters 5 and 6 to offer advice for how to implement this spirituality on a practical level, sections I highly recommend that you read for yourself. It is this spirituality, one of interconnectedness and communal responsibility for all of creation, that Francis seeks to engender in all of us. As much as Laudato Si is described as the encyclical about the environment, it's clear that this hardly does it justice. Francis is not concerned with tree-hugging or a New Age approach to nature disconnected from human existence. He's concerned with building a world in which every facet of our lives gives glory to God. We are all in this together. To hurt one of God's creatures is to hurt us all. As Christians, we care for the environment because we care for all that God has created, and we care for each other.
Okay. Sorry for the technical problems, but I think that's just a great overview of the Laudato Si. So let me try to go back to the slideshow. Why is it not letting me go back to the slideshow? I don't understand why it's doing that. Okay, I don't know why it's doing. Resume slideshow. There we go. Okay, no, I don't want you again. All right, I want you. Okay, so now you've got that great overview of Laudato Si, and I'm going to dive a little bit more into it. A key to reading Laudato Si is kind of like we're talking about in the video. It's broken into 4 sort of main sections. One's being called See, where you begin to understand what Pope Francis is talking about. Judging, where you've been discerning the message. act where you're responding, and then a big part of it is celebrating. So there's kind of 10 green commandments of Laudato Si. Number 1 is to listen to the cry of the earth. Number 2, as I was talking about before, is to listen to the cry of the poor. So in Laudato Si, Pope Francis points out that today, however, we have to realize that a true ecological approach always becomes a social approach. It must integrate questions of justice in debates on the environment, so as to hear both the cry of the poor, of the earth, and the cry of the poor. So that is a big point of the Laudato Si, is that we can't separate out just the environmental issues from the social issues, and that we have to look at the whole picture and how the impacts that we're having on our planet are being impacted by the least of our society, the poorest of our society. So discerning can offer Christians and some other believers as well ample motivation to care for nature and for its most vulnerable of their brothers and sisters. And then I'm quoting some of the text directly from Laudato Si. As they were talking about, the first chapters talk about the gospel of creation. So Pope Francis offers a theological criterion to judge the situation of our common home. It's really a religious vision of the natural world. The very title of the second chapter, wherein Pope Francis offers the theological vision of the natural world, is particularly significant. The chapter is called The Gospel of Creation. And the encyclical affirms that the creation is truly gospel, evangelion, and the good news. So creation is good news on account of 2 fundamental truths. First of all, creation has a basic goodness about it, as we read about in the book of Genesis. We are in the book of Genesis. We must forcefully reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion reject the notion that our being created in God's image and given dominion over the earth justifies absolute domination over other creatures. Secondly, Pope Francis notes that within the Judeo-Christian tradition, the word creation has a broader meaning than nature, for it has to do with God's loving plan in which every creature has its own value and significance. Every creature is thus the object of the Father's tenderness. This is quoting Laudato Si again. Who gives it its place in the world? Even the fleeting life of the least of beings is the object of his love, and it feels second of its existence. God enfolds it with affection. Saint Basil the Great described the Creator as goodness without measure, while Dante Alighieri spoke of the love of which moves. We need to remember that God's creation is God's first and primordial revelation. According to Pope Francis, God has written a precious book whose letters are the multitude of created things present in the universe. The creation is indeed the very first epiphany of God. This is where we have a drawing of God, of Jesus gazing on this creation. So as we all know from our Catholic social teaching, Jesus lived in full harmony with creation, apart from the world nor an enemy to the pleasant things of life. Pope Francis points out that Jesus did not despise the body, matter, and things of the world. For most of his life, Jesus worked with his hands in daily contact with the matter created by God, which he gave to his form by his craftsmanship. And so the number 4 lesson is that you must recognize that the abuse of creation is an ecological sin, and that's a critical part of the Laudato Si. It's a spiritual and religious crisis. The violence present in our hearts, wounded by sin, is also reflected in the symptoms of sickness evident in the soil, in the water, in the air, and in all forms of life. One of the things I found interesting is that Pope Francis quotes Pope Benedict quite a bit in Laudato Si, and Pope Benedict had done quite a lot of work and writings on caring for our common home and the environment prior to Pope Francis becoming the Pope. So this is a quote from Pope Benedict: "The external deserts are expanding because the internal deserts have become so vast." So in 3 fundamental and closely intertwined relationships with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself, according to the Bible, these 3 vital relationships have been broken, and that rupture is sin. And this is relating back to the original sin of Adam and Eve and not caring for the creation of the garden that God had provided for them. And also in Cain and Abel, we see the first violence and homicide. So creation not only reveals our symbolic communion with the divine, but it's also a concrete means for communion with the human family and within the larger biotic community. The human family and the whole of creation implies the common destination of Earth's goods for which we are meant for everyone. God gave the earth to the whole human race for the sustenance of all its members, without excluding or favoring anyone. So this is just a little representation of how we, how the global footprint and resources are not shared equally across the world. So this just shows you how many Earths we would need if the world's population lived like these countries. So like in Australia, if everyone lived like they live in Australia, we would need almost 6 Earths. If everyone lived in the USA, we would need almost 5 Earths. But then you look at India is barely using 1 Earth. Brazil only 2. So this is just a way to represent that we are not sharing our resources equally across the world. I think it's a really interesting way to show that. And this is a painting by Joey Velasquez, which is a representation of obviously the Last Supper. But the painting shows Jesus eating not with the apostles, but with a group of street children. And so they are, you can show that they are all eating in very nasty and dilapidated settings. And actually each one of those children is a real street child that they cared for in this program. So just a great way to represent the disparity of resources. It's estimated that 821 million people do not have enough to eat and go to bed hungry every night. And that COVID will likely add another 100 to 200 more million people this year from COVID. So the 5th lesson is that we must acknowledge the deeper human roots of the crisis of our common home. Pope Francis says it would hardly be helpful to describe the symptoms without acknowledging the human origins of the ecological crisis. A certain way of understanding human life and activity has gone awry and to the serious detriment of the world around us. Should we not pause and consider this? At this stage, I propose that we focus on the dominant technocratic paradigm and the place of human beings and of all human action in the world. And in the video, they talked about the technocratic paradigm that Pope Francis talks about. So the technocratical paradigm has become so dominant that it would be difficult to do without their resources and even more difficult to utilize them without being dominated by their internal logic. As a result, man seizes hold of the naked elements of both nature and human nature. This is just a representation of what technocracy means. So according to Pope Francis, to get deeper human roots of the contemporary ecological crisis, we need to get to the underlying conceptual foundations of the reigning dominant technocratic paradigm. The deeper roots of the crisis are modern anthropocentrism and the mechanism vision of the natural world. So this is another example of how we see ourselves as being the center of the world. So modern anthropocentrism is, can be described as the total independence and absolute centrality that human beings are the one and only point of reference. It's a distorted view of the relationship between humanity and the natural world. So in that mechanistic conception of the natural world, we see Earth as a storehouse for resources for our own use. The industrial rationality of modern economy focused exclusively on how to compete to increase wealth, infinite economic growth, and technology mastery. So there's an urgent need for us to move forward in a bold and cultural revolution, Pope Francis says in Laudato Si. And his solution is that we need to create a new integral ecology as a way to move forward, to actually act and take action. So this is just a representation of integral ecology being something that we really need to change our view of how we see ourselves in the world, interacting with the world and with our fellow brothers and sisters. Human life is grounded in 3 fundamental and closely intertwined relationships: with God, with our neighbor, and with the earth itself. And this is coming from our social, Catholic social teaching. So, and there's a great urgency to act, as we all know. This slide just shows you, it's a little hard to understand, but it just shows you the number of years we have before we reach the different levels of increase in carbon in global temperature. We're striving right now to stay under the 2 degree Celsius change, but we're rapidly likely to blow through that and continue to increase temperatures across the world. And this is just another representation of some of the impacts that we are seeing and can see more of. Things like in the top, the melting of the Greenland ice sheet, which will cause, catastrophic changes in sea level rise and impacts society across the world. we're seeing the boreal forest be taken, being destroyed by farming. We're seeing increases in the El Nino and Southern Oscillation here in Pacific. We're seeing the Amazon rainforest being destroyed, more monsoons. The tropical reefs are being destroyed by ocean acidification, and we have melting of the Arctic ice sheets in Antarctica as well. And ultimately, we do this for the children, right? We do this for the future. And the kids have been, sorry, the children have really been, the leaders in climate change, as you all know, with the climate strikes and with various activities. And it's just been amazing to see. So enough of the bad stuff. So back to Laudato Si. This is a special anniversary. It's the 5th year of Laudato Si. So there's a lot of activities coming up related to the anniversary this year. So some of the things that we've been a part of is the season of creation, which we just finished, which just ended in October. But there's going to be various activities and events happening throughout the world, in the Vatican and on all over the countries. And we, like I said, it's a special anniversary year, and there'll be some concluding celebrations as well at the end of the year. And so the goal of the rollout plan right now is to make communities around the world totally sustainable in the spirit of the integral ecology of Laudato Si. And Pope Francis is calling for this to be the Jubilee time for the earth and the poor. So here's a little fun video, because I know it's been a lot of like doom and gloom, but hopefully this plays for you too. I just wanted to show you this fun little Laudato Si song celebration.
Tremblement de terre. Écoute les pleurs des pauvres, les pleurs de la terre. Au secours! Sauvez-les pour la gloire du Seigneur.
Renuevo mi llamado urgente.
From the earth, our common home is falling apart, is on fire. Climate change is a modern day spiritual challenge. Grazie Santo Padre Papa Francesco per il Laudato Si.
Laudato Si, celebration. Laudato Si, oh mi Signore. Laudato Si, celebration. Laudato Si, oh mi Signore. Poverty, peace, and economy. Connected. The generation, our generation, connected.
Laudato Si celebration.
Laudato Si celebration. Laudato Si, oh mi Signore. Laudato Si generation. Laudato Si, oh mi Signore. Laudato Si celebration. Laudato Si, oh mi Signore. Laudato Si generation. Laudato Si, oh mi Signore.
C'est le moment. Amérique, Europe, Asia, tout est vaste, c'est le moment. Afrique, Australie, tout le monde est vaste, c'est le moment. My church, mosque, le temples, tout est vaste, c'est le moment. Building a better world together, one the common plan. Praying for creation, living simply, advocate for our common home. Per Dio, l'umanità e la natura. Grazie Santo Padre Papa Francesco per il Laudato Si. Waka waka!
So that was pretty cute, but also getting across all those same messages. Okay, hold on.
Good.
Come back. Sorry, trying to get back to this. Okay, whoa. Okay, so just some more additional resources for you guys. Just some films that are out right now, available on Netflix, that I would highly recommend taking a look at. My Octopus Teacher is just a phenomenal story of a connection of a person to an organism, an octopus. And if you haven't watched it, yeah, it's amazing. Another film that's out right now on Netflix is called Kiss the Ground. It's a great documentary that talks a lot about, and I didn't get into a lot of this, but sequestration of carbon into the, by growing trees and plants and trying to save our topsoil, which is also being just lost through desertification, and by trying to change farming practices to planting cover crops to create more, to save the topsoil, but also the plants sequester carbon. So it's a really excellent look at that. And a new documentary by Sir David Attenborough, A Life on Our Planet, is also on Netflix, which is phenomenal. And a lot of people ask me things about, like, what can you do to make a change in your life, in your world, you know, to combat this climate change. And this is something I pulled off the web from a group that I think is great. And you know, one of the major things is to plant trees. Plant trees in tropical rainforests in Brazil, Indonesia, Colombia, Madagascar. There's a group called Treedom that you can donate to. We need to protect what remains of the existing tropical forests. There's also this group called Cool Earth. So reforestation is one of the most cost-effective ways to prevent global warming, according to the American Association of the Advancement of Science. I was talking about with the sequestration, trees absorb carbon dioxide, which we all know, which, remember, makes up 82% of greenhouse gases in our atmosphere. So planting more trees can help reduce the amount of carbon in our atmosphere. It says, in fact, we could remove roughly 2/3 of human-made carbon just by letting all the forests regrow. And that's according to a study published in the Journal of Science. Number 2 is, I think you guys all know this is coming, it is more sustainable transportation habits, doing things like walking and biking instead of using your car, buying a climate-friendly car, hybrids or electric is, like in California here, that is where we are heading. Cars are one of the most biggest contributors to climate change. 82% of emissions from transportation comes from cars. And so cutting, you know, it's unlikely that you can cut out automotive transportation at all from your life, but even small changes can make a big impact. Also lowering your heating bill, setting your thermostat 68 degrees or lower, at 7 to 10 degrees for 8 hours a day. You know, having better windows, sealing up leaks. Electricity is also one of the biggest causes of greenhouse gas. So not so much a problem here in Southern California, but in other places, you might be using a lot of heat to heat your homes. Divesting from coal and encouraging others to do the same. Divesting your 401k from fossil fuels. Looking at how you're investing your funds and examining where your funds are going to, and divesting from those companies that support coal burning power plants are by the biggest emitters of carbon dioxide in the atmosphere. And coal in particular is a really big deal. 20% of industrial coal emissions are funded by public investors. So if people stop investing, we will actually see change in how we're producing our energy. And this is a big one that I'm trying to implement, eating less beef. One of the ideas is maybe don't eat cooked beef at home, only eat beef when you eat it out. Only eat beef on the weekends. If there's a choice between proteins, choosing not to eat beef, but going with an alternative protein. This is because emissions from animal agriculture account for around 15% of all human emissions, and beef in particular is responsible for 41% of that. This is an interesting fact. If cattle were their own nation, they would be the largest the third largest emitter of greenhouse gases. So, you know, places where we have those giant feedlots just full of cattle, not only are causing impacts to the soil, and but they're also these huge emitters of methane. So making a small change like limiting your beef consumption, maybe even going meatless 1 or 2 days a week could have a huge impact on the environment. The next one is educating girls. Giving to a charity that makes school more affordable and accessible for girls and lower and, I'm sorry, I just lost you guys. I'm having so much trouble today. Can you see this screen still?
Yeah, yeah.
Do you guys still see the screen? Yeah. Okay.
Yes.
Okay. Sorry.
Charity that
So,
makes
so
school-
educating women, educating girls is incredibly important. Project Drawdown, which is a project that's looking at ways to reduce our emissions, named Educating Girls as the #6 most impactful solution. And just for reference, composting is #60 and rooftop soil was #10. Women with more years of education have fewer children and therefore have a lower carbon footprint, but also women have a disproportionate share of decision-making around water, cooking, food waste, fuel choices, and how homes are heated, built, and used. So it's one of the most powerful climate solutions of all. This says educating girls is one of the most cost-effective, high-impact ways of every nation to fight rising temperatures. And it's a topic that most Westerners might not think about because, you know, here in the West, we have equal education for women as well as men. And #7 is advocating for a healthy planet. Support climate legislation by doing, you know, things like sending letters to party leaders and candidates telling them your vote depends on their stance on global warming, volunteering for a candidate that supports efforts to stop global warming, and talking to your friends like I'm doing and family about the importance of working for a climate solution. Writing letters to support and implement a set of climate solutions. 100 companies produce 71% of the emissions worldwide. So what will compel big companies to act sustainably, consistently on a larger scale? And the last one is to become a climate warrior. Adapting a sustainable life isn't easy, especially since it's difficult to feel your actions are truly making a difference. But each time you take a step to prevent global warming, you're usually giving up something, whether it's time, money, or convenience. And this is why you should make sure that that the sacrifice you're making actually has a significant impact. And just to close, I'd say preventing global warming is more important now than ever. We're the last generation that can change the course of climate change, and we'll be the first to face it. So just to end on some things that we're doing right here at home. A lot of you participated in our beach cleanup this Sunday, and it was, you know, a great first step. We had a prayer for creation session beforehand, and we actually read the Canticle of the Sun, and then we went and collected trash at the beach, and so it's a good start and something we can do more of. And things like we gave out boxed water to people instead of plastic. So just making small changes to make an impact on your own home, your creation, and taking action to care for our common home. And that's all I had, but sorry, that was a lot of information, I know.
Yeah, a lot. And you went through it very quickly.
Oh, sorry, was it too fast?
Yeah. You should, it would be good if we could get some of the suggestions of what to do. If you could
Yes.
do that on paper and pass it out to people.
So you guys can turn your videos back on if you want now. If you have any questions or comments.
That was very interesting. Yeah.
Very nice, Jen.
I would say, you know, if you haven't read Laudato Si, it's, you know, you can get it on Amazon, and you know, it's a lot of great information. And you know, maybe now that with my introduction, you might be interested in reading the actual text.
I was surprised that Australia uses more energy than the United States.
Yeah.
On that graph of how many worlds it would take.
Mm-hmm.
Amazing.
When to plant trees, and now all the trees are burning, so we're going to really need to plant trees.
Mm-hmm.
Because all the forests are burning right now in California.
Right.
So.
Yeah, I mean, I think that, you know, I mean, it's hard to think about implementing what Pope Francis is calling for, but just trying to change people's attitudes about how we see ourselves in the environment is what needs to happen. But that's, you know, and not being, seeing ourselves as being, you know, mastering of the environment, but being part of it and being in it together is really what he's calling for, an integral change in our integral ecology, developing an integral ecology. But also trying to go back to focusing on actions that we can take ourselves.
So vegetarian 2 or 3 times a week, huh?
I know, and I was just going to suggest beef stew for our Zion trip. Oops.
Well, that's interesting about the beef more than the other animals.
Well, it's because
I think it's animal. I think it's animal, and it's animal in general because you use a lot of water to keep them growing, maintain them, and in the farm and stuff.
right.
Slaughterhouse and processing
climate change, yeah, it's the beef in particular because of the methane that they produce.
So we can have rabbit.
Oh,
They produce.
We can have chicken, and we can, and also, you know,
yeah, vegetarian vegetables.
yeah, vegetables, meatless Mondays, and you know, trying to, and also thinking about, you know, where your food's coming from too. You know, is your chicken coming from, you know, a mass chicken farm? You know, making those kind of choices.
well, is there any way I
That's
think
even better.
to reverse? I know what we need to do is prevent it from getting worse, but is there any way to reverse it at all, or is it too
That would be
far
right.
gone? You know, with the ice caps and all of those things that are happening with, you know, it seems like the lands that are dry, like here in California, the droughts are just getting worse droughts, and the storms are getting worse where there's a lot of rain. So is there any way to reduce or move back?
I mean, I think at this point, I mean, the time lag it would take for us to actually see reversal, but at this point, we're focusing on trying to prevent addition.
Right. I thought,
Right. But, you know, they do talk about that in places like if you watch the Kiss the Dirt movie, they, you know, the idea that then this project Drawdown is trying to look at how we could work on sequestering the carbon, and you know, through planting, but not just trees, but you know, changing a lot of how we farm and whether we farm for corn as food, and that goes to the beef as well. So a lot of what's produced in the farming is animal food, not even human food. So, and trying to teach farmers how to look at things differently and not to use so much pesticides and to have more of this cover crops and have the ground covered all the time. So yeah, I would really recommend that movie because it's a great, it gives some good hope for things that could change, but it's an uphill battle, you know, because you're fighting against huge industries and huge demand for food that's affordable for people to be able to buy.
But individual consumptions, I mean, if you just watch, you know, how, I mean, I think over here in America, we tend to be very wasteful, especially in water. The way, I mean, I have to think about it when I wash my hair and take a shower, turn off that thing, you know, not waste water, because, you know, turn off the water when you're brushing your teeth, you know.
Yeah.
Those little things, I think it's going to add up. But how many of us over here in America, over 347 million people, little bit is, you know, will count.
Right.
When you add it up.
We can't get people to wear masks. How can we get them to make
Right.
a little bit of water? I mean, you know, it's really very upsetting. Very upsetting.
But yeah, like things like that, like just turning off, like you said, just turning off the tap when you brush your teeth is can save a ton of water. And actually using your dishwasher instead of washing your dishes by hand uses less water than doing the dishes. Depending on how much dishes you have, it can use less water to run your dishwasher.
Right.
Yeah.
All those little things, I think we just have to remind each other.
5-minute showers.
Oh gosh,
Right.
don't hug me. But yeah, it's seriously, it's little things like that, seriously.
5
That
minutes.
over here in America, I think we take those things for granted because we have abundance of it. And we always have it, you know, like in my little village where, you know, we have to fetch water. So, you know, we know how to use it. We know how to conserve it because we have to do a lot of work to get it. And over here, you know, we have so much, you know, abundance of it. So we take it for granted.
When I was in the military, you know what we used to do? The ship could only produce so much water for the time that you're out to sea. So when you're on the ship, you actually have to take a shower, you water yourself, shut the water off, and then soap yourself, and then rinse, and then you get out. Because otherwise, if you use too much, nobody will be able to take a shower.
Right. Yeah, that's what it's
There's
like
a
on the
lot of
island.
things you could do.
Yeah, we have that saying, you know, if it's yellow, let it mellow. If it's brown, flush it down. You don't have to flush the toilet every time. You can let it stay.
Josie's getting good at that now.
I mean, no, seriously. I mean, my daughter, my oldest daughter was, you know, saying that, and she actually said that, you know, oh, Mom, we need to cut down eating steaks. Seriously, and meat. That's what she, you know, she was saying. Because, you know, she's watching the same thing that, you know, I get some documentaries that she's watching, and yeah, she's definitely, and she's just like you, Jen. She's like, no plastic, you know, no plastic water, you know, bottle. Just, you know, use the portable, you know, can. I mean, little things, you know, and I think it's gonna add up.
Yeah, I mean, that's a whole nother discussion is the plastic pollution, which is, you know, so bad.
Wine bottles. That's it.
And eventually we're going to get St. Bart's plastic free, right? That's one of our goals of the Care for Creation group is, you know, no more plastic at church. And we're getting there because we actually, in the break room now, we have a water dispenser, thanks to Emparo and everyone. So people can bring their own bottles and fill up their water, and we don't have to hand out little water bottles anymore. Especially the little ones, like, really drive me crazy. So, you know, things like that, getting people to think about bringing their own water bottles, you know, not buying giant cases of plastic in Costco of water bottles, can all add up.
You said about those carton bottles of water. So
the box water, yeah, that's, yeah.
Where do you buy that?
This is box water. You can get it in some stores around here. Also can get it on Amazon. It's in it's like a milk carton, basically. And yeah, it's called box water.
Yeah, that's good. But I never saw that before.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I'm starting to see it at like a lot of the races I do. They're handing out water in them. I don't know if they. Yeah, we can get Costco to replace all their plastic water bottles with box water. Look, Josie's got her box water. And there's also water in the can as well. There's water that's in cans like these that can be recycled. So there's a lot of options. But the best option is to just use your own water bottle. Right. You know, and just get in that habit of bringing your water with you everywhere you go in your reusable water bottles. And also, you know, I have a Brita in my fridge, so I make my own water in the Brita, so I don't have to buy any plastic water bottles.
Very good.
Packaging in there.
Vegetarian once a week. Start with once a week.
All right, yeah, I'll do that.
Yeah, come on, let's all have, you know, just even with our little group. Let's start once a week.
All a pledge. We'll make a pledge that we'll not eat one day a week to begin. Then we'll add on.
Yeah, and then as we improve, yeah.
Okay.
Very good.
I'm in.
Yes.
Yep,
That's how we can start.
Meatless Monday?
Meatless
Yeah,
Monday.
one day meatless, one day.
Are you
Yeah,
gonna share recipes?
we could.
Yeah.
Josie has good recipes.
Good idea.
Yeah.
All I know is meat recipes. And don't ask me. I'm just kidding. But I'm gonna cut down. I'm gonna cut down. You're right. I'm gonna cut down.
You know what? I'll have to get some from my daughter because she and her husband are doing a lot of meatless things. So she has a couple good recipes. So I'll try to get them from her and then email them to Jen, and she can email them out to everybody else.
Okay.
Oh yeah, I just started making the cauliflower fried rice. It's a bunch of
Mhm.
vegetables. It's really good.
Yeah,
You know,
that's
I
really
can
good.
eat it just by itself. It's really good. You know, so
Great.
Benny, I'm gonna have to leave you
Yeah.
guys. All right, but
It-
it was wonderful. It was very
Okay.
enlightening, and I hope that we can all be good and have one day at least meatless.
Yes.
Okay.
Hi, Mom.
All right.
Is
And
he
Reggie,
okay? Is Dad feeling okay?
Yes, you're,
He's feeling okay, but I'm gonna put him to bed now.
okay.
Okay.
good night, Mrs.
Bye.
Boyce.
Bye.
Good night.
Bye. Thanks for joining.
Bye-bye.
Elisa, you have anything to add?
I don't know how to get out of here.
No, one of the Netflix films that documentaries you mentioned, there's another one that's really good that someone who was at the beach cleanup mentioned is called Down to Earth with Zac
Yeah.
Efron.
Yeah,
And
I was gonna add that too. That's excellent.
that one
It's like a 6-part series. Yeah.
yeah, I've only watched 2 or 3, but it's amazing. When it really breaks it down easily to see what the impacts are.
what is
So-
that on? Is that Netflix or
It's on
Amazon?
That's on Prime.
Oh wait,
that's
no,
on
yeah, I'm
Prime,
sorry,
actually.
it's on Prime, Amazon Prime.
It's on Prime. I think it's on Prime. Yeah. It's called
No.
Down to Earth. It's really good.
Yeah,
No, maybe it's on Netflix.
no, it's on
Can't remember.
Netflix. It's on Netflix.
Oh, they're all,
It's on
You're right, it's on
Netflix.
Netflix.
But it's really amazing because it's a young actor, so his perspective's a little fresh. And like one of the impressive things was about
I'm gonna write it down.
water, and one of the episodes was about water, and they went to Paris and about how the city of Paris, France, processes their water to make water available to everyone, and you carry around your bottle with you, and you can have really good water and fill it up
Yeah,
different
they have
parts
like
of the
they have an app where you can find the water dispensers. There's an
Yeah.
app and it shows you on the
Yeah.
app where you. I didn't know about when we were in Paris. I don't remember that, but I didn't know that at the time. But yeah,
yeah.
you can like.
And then they
look
also went to
anywhere.
Lourdes.
Right, and they went to Lourdes. Yeah, so
And
you
they
guys
went
really
to
enjoy it.
Lourdes. Yeah, so
Yeah.
it's a really good show. And then the other thing I wanted to mention, talking about meatless days, I cook a lot of vegetarian or, to make myself think, sometimes you have that craving for some meat. If you buy the Beyond Burgers, the frozen Beyond Burgers, those are really, really good. For me, it's even better than just a regular hamburger. And you could get those, and they're very, you just cook them like a hamburger, and they're really good. And it makes it easy to have a meatless day instead of doing a regular hamburger. So, and you could buy those at Whole Foods. You could find them. They sell them at Costco if you want to buy a pack.
Ralph's
So
too has them.
it's something easy to do.
I think Trader Joe's is selling them now too.
Okay, yeah, most
I don't know if
Ralph's
they're
has
Beyond
them.
Burger, but they have a couple different.
Yeah.
Mhm.
So they have different products. So if you want to try meatless, you could do that. And
let's
it's,
not forget fish.
yeah, fish. But it's those
fish-
little changes
fish
that
you have to be
really,
careful
when
about.
you think about it, they make an impact.
Yeah.
Soy
What kind of
chorizo,
fish?
we're making soy chorizo for Zion for breakfast. It tastes
Okay.
good. You can't tell the difference. Soy chorizo and eggs for breakfast
That's
with potato.
vegetarian?
That's vegetarian. I told you, see, I have one already. Soy chorizo.
And so is
Yeah.
the Espanol omelet.
All right. Well, thanks you guys for sticking through it
Good
all.
presentation, Jen.
Good
Thank
job,
you.
Thank you, Jen. That was
I know
great.
It got a little theoretical, but
And
That
Melissa,
was
thank
awesome.
you too.
what's that?
We can hear you, Dean. Unmute.
Oh,
Good to
she's,
see you guys.
Thank you.
Thanks, Jen.
Bye.
thank
Bye. Thanks for
you.
joining.
I miss you.
Have a good
Dean.
evening.
We miss you too.
When are you gonna start walking with
Oh,
us
you
again?
like Paula's birthday. We gotta go over there.